Thank you everyone for joining today to this webinar series for the Bachelor in Design Management International at the Hochschule Luzern or the Luzern University of Applied Sciences and Art. And today we are extremely lucky in having Kevin with us. He has a fantastic career, a very interdisciplinary career. I'm not going to be introducing himself. I have asked Kevin to please introduce himself because I find that to be more natural than reading a piece of paper. So I would propose that we start. So Kevin, when you are ready, please start saying who you are, what's your background, what have you done, and all the pretty things.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me back, and it's a pleasure to join you all. Thank you for the time. Again, my name is Kevin Bethune. I function as a designer, entrepreneur, more recently author, and then recently, I'm serving as a television host for a design show called America by Design, and you might have seen variants like Europe by Design, Australia by Design. Hotels by Design. These shows are on, all the episodes are on YouTube, but they are broadcasted in different networks and streaming channels. But you can find all the episodes that we're shooting on YouTube whenever you get the chance to check it out. Um, so in terms of background, I often say that I didn't start in design. I found design mid-career, but based on the way the world is moving, I'm just extremely thankful for the timing and what design has done in my life. I actually started my career creatively curious, but not knowing that I could associate that to a formal path in design or even innovation. Those words were abstract notions. But because of my interests intersected with drawing, math, science, engineering, perhaps made more pragmatic sense to start the career. So I started as a mechanical engineer. I entered the nuclear power industry, and that's where I cut my teeth on product, learn how to work with teams to achieve product-driven milestones. Well, fast forward, a natural curiosity for business arose in that, where I just wanted to connect the dots and understand. I felt like I was lacking this business acumen, so I went and pursued a graduate degree in business to add that vernacular to my toolkit. I had a privilege of joining a company that embodied not only business and technology, but also creative. And maybe that maybe scratched the itch of my inner child. And I was thankful to have that opportunity. So I joined Nike Inc. at world headquarters up north from me in Beaverton, Oregon. I started as a business planner, and that role, that team, the mission was to roll up the financial and operational numbers and insights to synthesize that information for the senior executives that sat one floor above me and help those executives with the right talking points as they navigated calls with Wall Street here in North America to navigate those investor related calls each quarter. But the product person within, I quickly wanted to network to find the product people at Nike and eventually made my way over to Global Footwear, the product creation engine of Nike. And that's when I saw professional designers for the first time. And so to learn and stretch, I started designing shoes, moonlighting. Eventually decided to go back to school again for a graduate degree in design to solidify the creative leg of my stool. And I've been working in innovation ever since for some incubators. And then over the last 7 to 8 years, my own practice in dreams, design, and life. And I've been writing books about those experiences as well. So very, very privileged journey. But I'd like to say I found design and design found me. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear your sound.
Or I mute. Thank you very much for the introduction. You mentioned your books. Uh,
Yes.
I put the link in the chat of both things, the program American by Design and the books. And I think it would be great to start with the two books that you have recently written. Can you tell us a little bit about how, why, why now?
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's interesting. I never thought I would be a writer or an author of a book. Um, but in a recent chapter, I had the opportunity to serve as a creative co-founder to stand up design and innovation capabilities for this incubator that eventually was acquired by the Boston Consulting Group, BCG. It's a tier one management consulting firm that whispers strategy in the ear of a lot of senior executives all around the world. And but BCG was very interested in uh, creating a more integrated capability. And when they found our team, we represented this capability that could see growth and innovation opportunities through the lens of design, technology, and business working together in a multidisciplinary fashion. And there were a lot of trials and tribulations to grow that engine from this handful of us to a large scale engine for BCG. We were called BCG Digital Ventures at the time of that trajectory. And I noticed that BCG had a culture of intellectual curiosity. Aside from the day-to-day work, a lot of their people were always writing articles, giving talks, even writing books. And so, since we were standing up design in a very unique space, and we were showcasing in a reimagined way what design could really do at a strategic level, at a management level, there was something there to codify. So, I started tinkering with the idea of a book proposal based on the inspiration of the BCG culture. And it took a few years before before I could get introduced to a publisher. But funny, well, not funny, but funny enough, at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we were all going into isolation all around the world, that's when my book contract landed. So I hate to say I had some quiet time in that weirdness while we're trying to figure out, is everything okay? Are we going to be okay? So this first book, Reimagining Design, eventually came out the other side of the process in 2022. And it was meant to be initially just a codification of all those experiences of what design could do in multidisciplinary situations, how it could help executives and founding teams think about growth and new opportunity. But the surprising pivot of writing this one was as I was writing, and we were going through all the craziness of 2020, 2021. I started reflecting on my own path, the resistance, the systemic issues that our society faces, how that even affected my own family trajectory. It ended up serving as almost like half memoir, and the notion of lived experience served as the foundation for any innovation perspectives I was offering. So people got sort of a memoir as well as some rooting in design approaches through this first book. And then
And
before, oh, sorry.
no, because you mentioned what design can do at the strategic level. So
Mhm.
tell me a little bit more about what you say in that book,
Hmm.
Reimagining Design, that you think that design management can do at the strategic level.
Yeah, I think I do. After spending time rooting people in the origin story of what bred the perspectives, I do spend a considerable amount of time just uh, anchoring where design's perception has been. And even before the start of this call, we were talking about just the various evolutions of design management. But for me, I got to feel that when all of a sudden I'm in this runway, feeling like how design is being perceived by actors that were sitting around the table with me, and also feeling those misperceptions of like, oh, you're asking me to do a very transactional thing, but I could really do this imaginative thing and help us open our apertures to consider the wider multitude of opportunities than just what you're asking for. So there's a lot of future foresight that I get into in that. There's a lot of discussion around contextualizing how design can play and how the outputs can actually inform strategy as well as execution. So
Yeah.
context matters. What type of growth are we talking about? What type of innovation are we talking about? And then I think I round out the book with a lot of conversation around the transition management required
Mhm.
to take an organization that has low or limited design maturity
Mhm.
and through the idea of like clarifying people's roles, approaches, tools and enablement and empowerment, and even leadership tact that we should take. All those vehicles are critical to help an organization transition to be able to take advantage of the benefits of design management.
Great. Thank you.
And even before the first one was even released, the publishing team was asking me to start the second one in a staggered fashion. So,
Okay.
so at the early part of this year, finally the second book, Nonlinear, came out. And it's not necessarily a sequel to the first one. Uh, but it does stand on its own. You don't have to read the first one to read this one. But I do believe there was more to say around, okay, if we're aligned on what design can do at parity with other disciplines around the table,
Mhm.
what is the journey of navigating toward that new and novel innovation? What should that journey feel like?
Mhm.
And just a quick summarization of that is, I don't mean any disrespect to any design thinking book that precedes this one. Um, but a lot of the frameworks, whether it's double diamond or 6-step, 5-step, 7-step sprint frameworks and things, I believe the authors of those frameworks had good intent. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, the business world has treated a lot of that as, oh, well, that's the method I should follow. That's the methodology of what constitutes design thinking and all these things. And it's unfortunate to watch the business landscape treat those as almost like gospel, and that if you follow these recipes, you get innovation. And reality doesn't work that way. So I really wanted to celebrate the nuances
Yeah.
of what it takes to learn your way to that outcome.
Yeah. And because of that, and unfortunately, all these linear models are playing against designers right now. You know that we share with our students or make a difference with our students between design as a recipe and design management as a discipline.
Mm.
And as you were saying, these linear models, when applied like this, like the recipe, they don't work.
Mhm.
And so it's problematic, and it's causing negative consequences for designers. And I think that a lot of designers are realizing that. You mentioned what should the journey look like? And you also mentioned something that is the interdisciplinary nature of design management. They will need to work with people from other disciplines. Uh,
Mhm.
it depends. Of course, there are exceptions depending on the area. So can you tell us a little bit more about that journey and that interdisciplinary nature?
Yeah. I think the first thing I'll say is that when you mash different disciplines together around the table, I think a lot of companies, organizations don't realize how limited that was for a lot of organizations.
Mhm.
Like always, they'll nod their head and say, "Yeah, I want to work in a multidisciplinary fashion,"
Mhm.
but the amount of time spent doing that actually is still far limited.
Yeah.
Now, granted, as organizations grow, we know specialization is part of the deal. As things scale, people have their lanes of expertise. I'm not criticizing that, but the best, most innovative organizations still figure out a way to allot some bandwidth to allow the different disciplines to talk to each other, to
Mhm.
get in a room and spend time together.
Yeah.
And and as a designer, to your point, sometimes we might be gifted in certain skill sets that the business relies on, great. But if we don't have courage to stand up and say, actually, I know you're asking or you're used to getting this from me,
Mhm.
I could give you so much more if you let me have a little bit of breathing room to
Mhm.
show you
Yeah.
versus following, to your point, following a recipe and expecting. And that's when design gets beat up because the outcomes are usually lackluster.
Mhm.
The business stakeholders don't understand like why there's a problem, but then they'll start pointing fingers at design,
Yeah.
and that's an unfair position in many respects. So instead, I try to just encourage teams to think about the breadth and depth of collaboration, and this is not just for design; it's for everyone.
Yeah.
From a breadth perspective, how do each of us uniquely collaborate, communicate, and strategically align with each other and learn each other's languages and become fluent with each other's needs so
Mhm.
that we get on the same page much faster? But still, at the end of the day, we have to contribute.
Mhm.
and rely on our depth of expertise to deliver something to the team. So instead of just feeding into more process pedagogy, I
Mhm.
wanted nonlinear to represent more of a treatise or a thesis on intuition, the intuition that's necessary. So literally in the book, and I'm finding an example, I had to draw a map of what reality looks like.
Mhm.
And for me, it's this proverbial forest of ambiguity. So this is it, sort of empty, if you can see that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
if you remember your J.R.R. Tolkien novels from when we were kids reading The Hobbit, it's sort of like a treasure map of the landscape.
Ah, nice.
And when many businesses encounter the question of, with all this volatility and all this dynamic paradigms shifts and all these things, how do I even grow? How do I even innovate to figure out what's next? We find ourselves in a forest of ambiguity.
Mhm.
There's a multitude of starting points. There's a multitude of information that we might have at our disposal. There's a lot of things that we don't know.
Mhm.
And I wanted to just argue for like we still have to we still have to drive work. We still have to drive progress. But I think about it as, let's recognize that we're in a forest of ambiguity.
Mhm.
Let's take stock in the position that we're in the moment. And there's probably things that we know. There's
Mhm.
probably a lot of things that we don't know. So let's establish actual vectors
Mhm.
of effort that we can begin to take steps. And a vector from our early math and physics, it's like a vector is a level of effort and the direction, right?
Mhm.
So if we're investigating, there's a multitude of choices that we have. If we're ideating, multitude of choices. If we're curating, if we're strategically framing using quant and qual, that's a multitude of vectors and choices
Yeah,
that move us away from just rote behavior.
yeah.
So,
You mentioned growth several times, and we make the difference between um, qualitative growth and quantitative growth. For example, sustainability or growing in terms of paying attention to planetary boundaries
hmm.
might be related to both growing in quality and growing in quantity. And it's a concept that comes from Frishot Capra. I will look at the blog of Frishot Capra then after and, and put the link for the people that are here now. Um, how do you perceive the conversation that you have with these organizations as a design manager when talking about growth? And you were talking about having more space. Can you bring that perspective of saying this will be growing in quantity, this will be growing also in quality?
Yeah, I might have a slightly different frameworks, but I agree with that articulation. And when it comes to growth, context matters a great deal. And I'm not what I'm not encouraging is feeding into the the excessive consumption patterns where
Mhm.
it's just like we're just constantly inundated by marketers marketing to us and just being expected to consume. And we see where that's getting us when we look at our environment, our societies in general. Um, I'm arguing for respectful, sustainable, regenerative growth. And I do think, unfortunately, like a lot of these thematics around sustainability ethics have lived on the fringes of our problem solving. Like when you peek into most companies, the amount of time spent on those topics is still infinitesimal
Yeah,
compared to the bigger concern of how do we make money and sustain our money.
yeah.
Uh, so so when it comes to growth, I try to influence teams to connect that to value criteria. So no matter the sector, no matter the industry, we all have to serve not just an end customer. Usually there's other people in the orbits, and everyone has different value criteria. And the world is a lot smaller, it's hyper-connected, it's very diverse, as we know. So the values of who we're serving ultimately,
Hmm.
people are caring more and more about, in a good way, things that affect people and planet,
Yeah.
and not just B2C. but also within businesses, B to B to C.
Yeah.
So how do we map those ecosystems of stakeholder and really distill, and it takes work to distill the value criteria of what really matters to each of those constituents.
Mm.
And what I find missing, honestly, in most projects, you mentioned quant and qual,
Yeah.
tons of data.
Hmm.
Like I could fire, if I don't have data, I can go fire up a survey, like and literally have data in hours.
Yeah.
Or I could buy a research report from an industry, leader.
Yeah.
Um, but what's often missing is the the qualitative, the thicker data that isn't necessarily coming from a statistically significant sample, because we need statistical significance for conclusive evidence, for data for the sake of data. But what we don't have usually is the richer substance that takes spending a lot more time with a limited subset of people, and it's not for statistical conclusive outcomes. It's for the substance that I need to design. It's to shape an actual experience. And that's what's typically missing in most cases.
Mhm. I put it in the chat, the link of the qualitative growth of Frishot Capra that he wrote with Hazel Henderson.
Hmm.
People can take a look. Shall we move into the evolving design management? So we know
Yes.
where is it coming from, but where is it going? And we
Hmm.
were saying at the beginning that in around 1960, 1965, we know already that it was within the context of manufacturing and sales or marketing.
Hmm.
And I don't know what you think that once you have the manufacturing and the marketing and sales, then the next step was to bring teams together. Or some people talk about breaching silos, right? So people or different areas of the organizations that were not connected. You also mentioned at a certain point the need to foster collaboration. So there was a collaboration between departments, but then after was the collaboration between the teams. There are other areas that came up for design management. That was the organization of work,
Hmm.
not just bringing some departments together, but how do we organize work? How do we work together? Hmm?
Hmm.
There is an article that I can put in the chat that says, and it's a recent article, 2024, about systems design. And the article said, despite an emerging trend in both the academic and professional communities to acknowledge the importance of design management for sustainability, the design management and design thinking, not thinking,
Hmm.
um, literature has still been overwhelmed by linear approaches and a focus on short-term financial profit. So we can see a link to your book, to Nonlinear, and the
Hmm.
critique also that particular when we work and design management expands to other areas like sustainability, regenerative design, you also mentioned regeneration, uh,
Hmm.
linearity no longer works.
Hmm.
So how do you see that? Are we still there or are we still going towards, how do you perceive that?
Yeah, we're definitely the short answer is I do believe we're at an inflection point,
Mhm.
and it's gonna take courage for us to get out of it in a positive way. And I say that um, I'm just one person, but I've had the privilege of being part of communities where I've gotten to see a lot of anecdotal evidence. One
Mhm.
of those organizations is the Design Management Institute.
Mhm.
Um, DMI, if you go to dmi.org, you can learn more about Design Management Institute. But I had the privilege of serving on the board for roughly 7.5 years, um, and served as board chair. I recently rolled off the board, but during that time, I was able to serve on the board alongside notable chief design officers such as Mauro Percini,
Mhm.
Ernesto Contreras when he was leading Johnson and Johnson's design studio, and many other dynamic leaders like that. And design, from their experiences, design surely to your description of the evolution, like
Mhm.
their roles embodied that evolution, that trajectory. The evidence, the projects that they shared in those conference convenings was really impactful and inspiring. And we learned from each other, like, oh, you're doing that at your organization. I'll try that for my studio, and here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Unfortunately, with all the volatility, the global volatility of the last few years since the pandemic, I've seen I hate to say it, a hardening in the business landscape globally, where the appetite to be future forward, to think about innovation holistically, to think about cascading consequences on ethics, sustainability, all those like more bleeding edge concerns started to retreat.
Mhm.
There's been a retraction.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, when business waters get choppy, the stakeholders that have enjoyed the lion's share of influence over the course of industries being shaped, those stakeholders will start to say, you know what, we don't necessarily need that. That's a nice to have.
Mhm.
So a lot of the creative disciplines like marketing, design, futures,
Yeah.
long-term strategic thinking, those things started getting thrown over the boat
Mhm.
because like we have to batten down the hatches, like we have to focus on shipping stuff and keeping our business viable now.
Yeah.
So we don't need this other fluffy stuff.
Mm.
And unfortunately, we've seen a retreat of design's place a little bit where like one example, Ernesto from his J&J experience, he was very vocal about what that experience was like. He
Mhm.
shared it openly in the DMI community of what it was like to see his department being sort of, dismantled because of other agendas that were at play that diminished design.
Yeah.
So, we have to take learnings from that.
Mhm.
And organizations that have done that, I think now they're starting to get penalized because of lack of innovation, being too myopic in how they think about what they ship,
Yeah.
not being concerned about cascading consequences. And their customers are holding up receipts saying, you didn't care, you didn't recognize this bias, now it's hurting, it's harming people. And we're seeing a lot of that with the generative AI conversation now. So it's a pendulum swing, unfortunately, and we have to wait for that pendulum to swing back, where bold organizations will see the value in design operating at parity and
Yeah.
want to continue to celebrate design's place to broker these very important conversations.
Yeah. And so we are in a process where some organizations are, uh, I wouldn't say going backward, but let us say stuck in
Mhm.
that position. Some might be going backwards. Um, we are in our program, in
Mhm.
design management program, we place design management in the context of organizational strategy, organizational transformation.
Mhm.
How that for me is where we are and where design management is. How do you see the landscape, and what do you think should be next? The next,
Mhm.
where are we moving when we see what's taking place in the current present?
Mhm.
I think that we see both. Some organizations are um, not advancing on some areas, but we do see more approaches toward regeneration, regenerative business. We have regenerative marketing. Organizations like Whole Foods have regenerative marketing. So we see some change,
Mhm.
some positive change at
Mhm.
the discourse taking place. Where do you see we will be next? We are going to be moving more towards regenerative approaches, more towards quality, putting life at the center,
Mhm.
planetary life at the center, not just human life.
Yeah. Y- You know, and I'm encouraged by the anecdotes that you're describing because I don't think a lot of us in our creative community even know about all these examples that you're citing. Because and the reason why is because there's so much noise, there's so much loud voices, so much loudness from the people that have enjoyed the spoil of power and influence and privilege over these decades.
Mhm.
It's who do we listen to most in business media? It's Wall Street, or it's titans who are now getting the nickname of oligarch, the tech titans from Silicon Valley. And it's like their rhetoric is so loud, but it's based on nefarious agendas that only feed into hypercapitalism or hyperconsumption or hypercontrol, especially when it comes to the role that technology plays. At least in North America, the degree of consolidation of technical power is appalling to sort of watch. You know,
Mhm.
everything we use, unfortunately, is controlled by fewer and fewer players. And I worry about the control aspect of that. So all that to say is that I think we have an imperative as a creative community to be much louder with our stories of how we're connecting the dots in different ways. And and when it comes to an organization, you mentioned transformation. You know, to broker any change, no matter the vision that we have, as designers, we might have the coolest, sexiest vision of what's possible, but we also, to your point, we have to be a good leader
Mhm.
and say, you know, I need to care also about how do I bring other team members along for that journey toward that vision. I gotta educate. I have to think about teaching my approach or teaching how to navigate nonlinearity, ambiguity, uncertainty. Um, and then like having the courage to hold up evidence of you didn't ask for this, but I'm holding up something I made. And that's where we need to go because through making and through experimentation, even through speculating, because a lot of teams will not ask a designer to speculate.
Yeah,
They want the thing. Well, maybe part of my ideation is just speculating what maybe could be. I'm not designing for the should. I'm designing for the what could be.
yeah,
And maybe it's not a few answers. Maybe I'm creating several
yeah,
concepts and having conversation. So creating the bandwidth for that is an act of courage because most businesses are like, we don't have time for that.
yeah. I see that. We talk a lot about change and transformation, but I think we need to talk more about the effort it takes to change and transform an organization, regardless of the site. It could be a family organization, it could be a multinational organization. Transforming an organization is difficult. As you were saying, it requires bringing different teams together, it requires learning, um, supporting a learning process, and supporting the uncertainty within this transformation process.
Yeah.
Because we might have the vision and we might have the plan, but it is an uncertain process.
Hmm.
And I do think that is that transformation
Mm.
site managers are managing.
Hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Planning. So the focus of what gets managed have shifted a lot throughout history
Hmm. I totally agree.
from managing a production process to managing this transformation process.
Hmm.
And I do also think that it requires very different skills, as you
Yeah.
mentioned in leadership, uh, but also a lot of resilience
Hmm. Hmm. That's right.
and a lot of courage. Because when we don't have the resilience, the easier thing is to give up and to say, okay, it, until here, or this is not working, or let's try something else.
Yeah.
So that,
I Yeah, no, it resonates. I think I think about like transformations I've been a part of, organizations that have transformed thanks to design. You know, there were visionary sponsors that created some room for things to happen, some safe spaces, some willingness to experiment and try, versus like I expect this from you and that's all I want. It took visionary sponsors like that. It took quickly codifying evidence as it was being created
Mhm.
and holding up the evidence to show others that maybe you should try something too.
Yeah,
And then after 6 to 12 months of learnings across the different pieces of the business, we can all hold up our evidence and have a summit.
yeah.
And that breeds more transformation appetite. But part of my worry, and also equal excitement is that this was all hard to do when change was predictable.
Hmm.
Now we're getting into this realm of runaway change where change itself is becoming nonlinear pretty quickly, thanks to generative AI and all these other paradigms.
Yeah.
So even more of an imperative for us to have more courage in how we lead, how we make, how we bring people along, how we educate.
Yeah.
And do we have the courage to be loud?
Mhm. And don't you think that because of this unpredictability, design management is even more necessary?
Yes, yes, emphatic yes.
Yeah. So how do we get the message across?
Unfortunately, like what we can imagine the loud voices that we hear already today, especially with generative AI, and it's like all we hear is like short-term efficiency, headcount reduction,
Mhm.
you know, uh, all the things I can do that we don't need these people for. Like this is the rhetoric that is so loud. And instead, like, can we work hard to imagine like what is possible with some of these new tools and recognize that, some of this, even these new advanced capabilities, it still has its limitations. It still has its time and place.
Mhm.
And it doesn't, nothing that hasn't necessarily shown itself to replace the actual critical thinking that's required,
Yeah.
the sensitive curation, the mindfulness and respect for culture, the critical thinking, the creative problem solving.
Mhm.
If anything, those things are becoming more valuable
Yeah.
because unfortunately, I think we're going to find a marketplace full of generative slop. I mean, the nickname is slop that we're hearing more and more these days. It's like we don't want our target audiences to have to mire and wade through a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're going to start to feel in a minute here.
Yeah.
So the value of our skills is only going to go up in my opinion.
Yeah. There is an article, and I don't think I will find it now, that was questioning the definition of intelligence,
Mm,
um, criticizing the focus of intelligence as mainly problem solving,
mm,
was suggesting that if we were to play care and intelligence together,
mm,
then our actions and the development of artificial intelligence as intelligence being together with care
mm,
and not only problem solving,
mm.
then we will be having different conversations.
That's interesting. I love that clarity. That's powerful.
So I think that maybe that's a conversation to start bringing. Even we were talking about the perspectives that some organizations have about design and also about design management, but also other notions like what do we talk about when we talk about intelligence? And it's
Mm,
not just problem solving.
yeah, I
It
love that.
is also caring for each other and caring for the planet we are part of.
Hmm, hmm.
We might need to expand also the understanding of intelligence.
Yeah. One excellent book I've just finished reading. It's a colleague that I met through the DMI
Mhm.
uh, conferencing. He's based out of the UK, but he wrote this book. He provided, you can find it on Amazon. It's called
Okay.
Agentics. And he's basically arguing the case for like when we think about agentics and how it informs experiences.
Mhm.
He's not just playing into the hype of generative AI and its capability. He's speaking to how do we rethink the language that we use to describe how we think about building new capabilities like this to inform experiences. And his language really gets us to root itself in meaning, the semiotics of okay, if we're going to allow this simulated cognition to manifest in the things that we're building, we need to rethink uh, how we rationalize the stack, how we think about taxonomy, how we think about how meaning is conveyed if we're going to deploy a capability called an agent to do whatever it is we think it should do. Like context matters, language matters, meaning matters, what the actual guardrails are that inform our ability to care, to be respectful, to be responsible. Like just this language that he's giving is the first time I've felt a sense of clarity of the mission
Nice.
using some of these new capabilities.
I put the link in the chat. And now we can open the dialogue to the participants that we have here. I see that the question and answer have a question mark, and I wonder why. What does it mean? So to our participants, can you please all write the questions in the chat? Or now I see one question in the Q&A. Can you see it, Kevin? Kevin.
Uh, I cannot. Let's see. And oh wait, there it is. There's the icon. Okay. So from Lena, thank you for your question, Lena. What skills or experiences beyond traditional design education would make someone stand out to you when building an innovation team? I'm asking because I'm finishing my studies and looking to position myself well for innovation roles in the workplace. How do you recommend young professionals communicate the value of design management to stakeholders who may not immediately see its value or ROI? Specifically, what you touched upon with this hardening of the business world. And then from your perspective, what makes the European or Swiss innovation ecosystem distinctive? What opportunities might I not see from the inside that I could or should leverage? Um, so skills and experiences beyond a traditional design education. Again, I think my mind goes back to breadth and depth. And I think some programs academically are starting to think about this and giving their students a simulated experience to feel that, begin to feel that. For example, the graduate program that I went through in design basically tried to run the cohort of us like a design studio. And the chair of the program was sort of the studio director. That was the simulation. And so every project, every studio, we brokered ourselves as teams against a given question. It could be a growth question or a hypothetical opportunity that's characterized for a sponsoring company. And as teams, we had to inform and formulate a strategy, leveraging a mixture of quant and qual techniques and strategic framing vehicles to hone in on the strategy that we wanted to pursue as a team. And then as individuals in that team, we had to execute our depth of design skills that we're learning, of course, to manifest an affordance, an object, a product, or a service that individually we would craft through our design expertise, but it still had to fit within the team strategy that we came up with together. And I think the teaming that happens in the workplace sort of functions that way, where now we're around the table problem solving with other disciplines. And that team still has to trust that we can deliver our design expertise, but it has to be in the context of what we're galvanizing on and aligning on as a team. So that breadth and depth is where I hope we can stretch beyond maybe the traditional design pedagogy to embrace what collaboration should feel like, how we communicate with others should feel like, and do that through our design uniqueness, if that makes sense. And so in your portfolios, as you think about talking with companies, your portfolio shouldn't just be a bunch of design craft exercises. It should speak to that breadth and depth of, okay, I'm connecting the dots here systematically, and then here's my design intervention that helps everyone along because this proposal was posited. Um, and how do you recommend young professionals communicate the value? I've seen a blessing and a curse here. It's a two-sided coin because we can definitely we can attempt to talk to our stakeholders about design's importance. But until they see the evidence, sometimes it will feel theoretical to them. No matter how many books and case studies we point to, they're not going to spend enough time to care. So we have to be careful not to soapbox ourselves and, oh, the great, design is so great, and here's what you get. They need to see it in their own context. And it takes holding up evidence, maybe almost subversively. Like this evidence will actually help you get to the North Star much faster and with more relevance and resonance if you do this versus what you asked of me or what you expected of me. So showing that difference through evidence creation is how you begin to bring people along because when people are faced with good evidence, then it becomes harder to dispute it. And in the early paces, you might have to educate 10 times to take every step. and then it becomes 5 times, and then it's 1 time, and then it becomes familiar. And even then, you have to be careful that it doesn't become rote, where you fall into linear traps. So keeping everyone's aperture open is also part of the deal. And then the last question about the European slash Swiss ecosystem. With humility, have to admit that I'm not as well traveled as I would like to have been, in regard to those regions. But in the projects that I do remember, traveling over to the continent and immersing in different teams across Europe, I did get the general feeling, and forgive the generalization here, but I did get the feeling that there was more stock in some of the hypotheses
Mhm.
that were on the table already. So the notion of blue sky, especially when I was dealing with maybe more science-driven or engineering-driven organizations, there was more respect for the need to validate existing hypotheses that had been on the parking lot for a while. And there was already credence and credibility around some of those hypotheses, but maybe the timing wasn't right yet for those things to really deploy as new innovation. And maybe the project that I was a part of was maybe the final couple of steps to get that project ready for go time versus coming in there trying to sell blue sky innovation where there was no credibility. So that was a distinction I at least remember feeling whenever I interacted with the region. So hopefully I addressed all those questions, Lena, to your liking.
Sorry that I went to plug in the computer because it was plugged in, but the switch was not on. So my
No
apologies.
worries. No worries.
We have two other questions.
Okay. Am I saying it right, Jorge, or is it
Yes.
true? Can you identify the main skills a design manager must possess as foundations of their ability to fit the role? Um, in I will say that, not to be cliche, but everyone is different. Even leadership, there tends to be certain archetypes of leader that are celebrated more than others. And, at least I can speak from my North America experience. There is that stereotypical alpha archetype, the loudest voice leading the team forward. And at least in my first book, I present dimensions from what I experienced as leadership, what I had to do personally, as well as great leadership qualities I learned from others, especially creative leaders. And I dimensionalized them across this rubric from the type of leader that wants to, and I wouldn't even call him a leader, the type of person that wants to keep things the status quo and they want to keep things comfortable and uh, certain based on old norms. Call that person a gatekeeper. And the other extreme is someone that recognizes change. They recognize the value criteria of different constituents that we're serving, and they want to make sure their teams evolve with the change and can respond. Call that person the servant leader who's thinking about the nutrients that they need to give their teams to function against the dynamic needs. They're thinking about role clarity. They're thinking about processes. They're thinking about tools. They're thinking about how to navigate the change and all the transition management of what it takes to bring people along for a new journey. Like those qualities of leadership are especially important. And you can find those dimensions in my first book, but just as a couple of anecdotal examples, if I were to set a vision, let's say for a team, should that team just religiously follow what I just said? Or should maybe I float a hypothesis and I back off and give the team members different pieces of that vision to chew on and make better. And they come back with a much better answer than the hypothesis I might have floated. One example of how different types of leaders across that spectrum behave. When the team is defending their work in front of executives, does it have to be me as the leader always in front defending the work? Or can I let each person defend their own work? And I'm sitting in the back of the room ready to support them if things get contentious, right? So that the quality of leadership needs to be different. And again, back to the breadth and depth, it's like you got to balance the calories required around you will be in rooms with different people. How are you leading? How are you influencing, communicating, aligning? And then still, how are you leveraging your design craft for whatever you're uniquely strong in? It could be design research, it could be UX, UI, it could be brand and visual design or industrial design. We all have our unique breadth and depth recipe and should feel like that should be valued in any team that we're a part of. Um, and then Malia.
Yeah, I think that to your comment of the stereotypical model of leadership that is promoted, and unfortunately is also present in the school. And I have heard things, for example, I would need to teach our students to be bold. And I think that our students need to be who they are and the way they are. And I think that we have throughout history a lot of models of leadership. Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama, the Madre Teresa, that they were loud in different ways.
Yep.
They were loud in a caring, quiet way. So maybe we also need to bring those models and say, well, if we look at history in leadership, what does it mean to be loud?
hmm
We're talking about more having a presence and having this resilience that we were talking before.
Yeah. So some of my it's not about me, but some of my most memorable moments that I felt as an individual, I'm an introvert. Like I'm not shy about saying that. It takes me energy. I am not the alpha leader in a boardroom pounding to the table. I'm not that person.
Mhm.
But I do remember moments where I felt this tug, this conviction to get up out of my seat while everyone's talking, very much in an alpha way. But to be in a boardroom and walk over in front of a group of executives and just walk over to the whiteboard silently without being asked. And I just start drawing what I'm hearing, but
Mhm.
also the ideas that I'm coming up with. It was a quiet way of leading the room. And all of a sudden I had everyone's attention and we could talk off visual anchors off the whiteboard. I mean that those moments are powerful.
Yeah. And listening is a way of leadership. It is indispensable for leadership. So you were listening, and because of that, then after you make it tangible by writing on the board what you have been listening.
Yes.
That's a,
Yes.
and I think it's a great skill. And also, I think that we need to talk about more what do we mean in design management when we mean or we say listening is a key skill. Not
Yes,
just
I agree.
hearing.
Yes, I agree.
Opening of us at several levels. Malia, now yes.
Do you have some examples for this evidence creation that you've mentioned several times? Maybe personal examples that worked well, strategies and methods. And then P.S. Speaking of sustainability and being loud, I'd love to quickly draw attention to the fact that Amazon is not the best place to. Yes, yes, yes. It's oh wow, yeah. No, that last part, respect taken. Yeah, it has been very difficult as a new author because of how dominant that channel is to have to pay attention to it, but also understanding the extraction and exploitation that happens especially in the publishing world. There's a lot of blessing in it because it's very complicated. And future end state would love to be far removed from that channel. But unfortunately, the power and influence and tentacles it has, like unfortunately, we're at a day where many folks would not even get a chance to even see the book if that avenue didn't exist. So no, I take that with respect. And the earlier part of your question around evidence creation, without thanks, Malia, without giving anything away, through the pandemic, I had a chance to collaborate with old friends in Nike Innovation. And I can't disclose like the nature of the projects, but just one example where we had to deal with product teams that were fixated on what they were typically used to shipping as product, t sneakers and t-shirts, just call it that. But I was part of a campaign. I was brought into a project by a sponsor um, that our charter was to think about holistic offenses that Nike could engage in with their target audiences that were more holistic beyond just a customer buying a pair of sneakers. What other things could we do for that athlete? And how could we actually celebrate some of these stories as we prepared for Nike's emergence into the Olympic Games for Paris? So we're working through the pandemic, preparing for Paris, and looking at all kinds of holistic solutioning plays that Nike could engage in for those athletes. And what's hard is the inertia around some of those product teams being so focused on what they're shipping, their passion for specific product is unparalleled. But to get them to collaborate holistically across the different silos, very challenging in some ways. So to help breed evidence, we created a library, a gallery space that
Mhm.
was literally adjacent from where they worked. And we made those teams literally walk through, like divorce a couple hours. You're going to come into our gallery space. And we immersed them in all types of different diverse ingredients that would open their creative aperture. So we introduced them to startups, research, a lot of things that were happening in the ether outside of Nike's walls. We brought it in as a rich gallery experience and had them just take note of different value criteria affecting their target audiences. Well, you might have been serving your audience this way, but notice this audience is caring about so many other things like sustainability, like wellness, like concern for microplastics entering the environment, like all these things that you're not talking about in your product team. We brought that to life. Literally, the room was full of like uh, digital screens with rolling footage of these different imperatives and different startups, different research. We had trend walls with all kinds of social trends, economic trends, environmental trends, policy trends, technical things, of course. We had exemplary product from competitors and also product categories that fell way outside of Nike's umbrella or purview. And we gave each person that went into the gallery a journal to take note of the things that were interesting. And then we tried to encourage them to create a story of new possibility by weaving these elements together. And then with the template, have them fill out a template and leave a new story on the wall that could be considered for the roadmap moving forward. And we brought hundreds of people, different teams through that experience with a lot of fanfare, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of excitement. And so we used that room as a catalyst to get them more comfortable with the idea of multidisciplinary and diverse sharing of information to inspire each other.
Nice. I think we have another question. No. Yeah, I think that this is a very good example of fostering learning within the organization.
Indeed, indeed.
So how do we help people or employees that are very, very busy right now? And as you said, they are so focused on what they are doing that it's difficult for them to learn. Bringing them into learning so that they can expand conception of things for what matters to people,
Mhm.
what are the trends, what are the policies, what are the different things that are taking place that might be very, very difficult to get for one person alone
Yeah.
when you are busy at work.
Well, in some ways, we have to breed not fear, but healthy paranoia to
Mhm.
say like what got us here? Like our ability to serve customers. Let's respect the core business that was established. Great. We're shipping product, it's feeding the business. All respect due to that.
Mhm.
But the healthy paranoia is recognizing that have we distilled enough the value criteria affecting those people we're claiming to serve? In
Mhm.
some ways, some of those values are staying steady for the course of humanity. Like okay, let's just keep doing what we're doing well there. But other imperatives are actually are being influenced by new paradigms. So every 6 months, you better believe there's a new paradigm affecting your audience. And how are you responding to that? Not for the sake of like just chasing trends or fads, but like really working hard to anticipate what people care about or what they will care about and being able to meet them where they are. There's not enough interrogation of that, of how we show up for each other in an anticipatory way versus, oh, I have a market funnel that I need to satiate. I need to move more people through my market funnel, and I need to encourage conversion to click to buy.
Yeah.
Like there's way too much conversation there and not really interrogating in a healthy way how we're actually showing up and anticipating needs.
Mhm.
And that takes work. It takes visualizing the ecosystem of stakeholder and distilling like let's like be clear based on the evidence what's happening with that person. Unfortunately, too many product teams are just plowing forward based on assumptions. And those assumptions that they had of what worked, unfortunately, are turning into cognitive dissonance or bias
Mhm.
and even harm.
Yeah. Yeah. I am aware of time, so we need to start closing. You mentioned several times the idea of leadership as service,
Mhm.
as being of service. And I think that that's key. Who are we helping? How are we helping? When do we help? And when we might need to acknowledge that we cannot help. It have happened sometimes in my professional life that I have said sorry, but as a design manager, I'm not the right person to help. In that case, I recommended grandmothers would be
Mhm.
the right experts or the people with the right knowledge to help.
Yes.
It has been lovely talking with you. Thank you very much for help us reflect about where is design management going and
Mhm.
for sharing with us your knowledge and experience.
My pleasure. A great conversation. I love the back and forth and the great questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.